Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vanini. I'm your host. I'm joined, as always, by theonlycolors.com managing editor Joe Toohey. We're coming to you four-ish days after the Michigan State men's basketball season ended, once again at the hands of Duke by an 81-61 score in the Final Four. The Blue Devils since went on to win the national championship against Wisconsin. So this will be a mostly basketball reflective podcast. There's obviously no games left to preview, but we'll talk a lot about Duke. We'll talk a lot about next year and where things kind of stand with the Spartans. But as I bring in my co-host Joe here, Joe, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I got some good Duke hate flowing today, which was
I saw that. We can talk about that a little bit later too. But if you haven't, Joe and Matt and some folks took exception to a tweet by our SB Nation Duke sister blog about hating Grayson Allen. We can get into that a little bit later. If you've still got those juices flowing. But
I'll talk about it a little bit. I'll try not to get myself in too much trouble,
but the game, it kind of was what it was, an 81-61 final score, which is Izzo's and I believe MSU's most lopsided loss in the tournament by final score, but I don't think by any accounts it was MSU's worst tournament performance. Big reason for that was MSU fouling late to try to do whatever it could to stage any sort of comeback. But it's a game where MSU started out quick, hot, 4 for 4 from deep. They were getting open looks. They got a 14-6 lead. Everything was looking good. And then as quickly as they started was as quickly as they stopped. I think they made 3 of their final 20 shots to end the half. They found themselves down 11 at halftime. The second half was, frankly, just really boring. It was a game that basically the deficit was moving between maybe 12 to 18 points, just kind of going back and forth until the free throws at the end clinched it. Any sort of run MSU tried to put together was quickly extinguished by Duke. They were clearly a better team, and the fact that they went on to win the national championship should tell you that. But I think what was most disappointing from Izzo's perspective and MSU's perspective was that it was far and away not the best performance the Spartans could have put out there. It wasn't the same MSU team that we'd seen for the past month. And when we say MSU had been playing their best ball in March, it was basically they were playing consistent. All year long, they were capable of throwing up some duds, but they hadn't thrown up a dud in at least a month plus, and then they happened to throw up a dud against Duke, a pretty ugly final score. Joe, as you look back on the game, what at first kind of just stuck out to you about how things played out?
Well, the first thing that was really obvious, I thought, was the turnover rate. I mean, we really did a terrible job of keeping track of the ball really at any point offensively, and that, I mean, is sort of something that's just kind of happened against Duke over the course of the years. The turnover rate was north of 20%, which was something that had been improving for MSU over the course of the year.
Right, it hadn't been a problem, and really for an entire game stretch, hadn't been a problem in a long time, or much all year. Louisville was a problem in the first half, but then they cut it down. Oklahoma, for the whole game, they just never got that figured out.
Yeah, and then defensively, I mean, it just seemed like, I mean, on the interior, Duke kind of had its way, and then Duke did a good job of being aggressive and drawing fouls. You could argue some of those foul calls. There are a couple on Brandon Dawson in the second half that I thought were a little questionable, but it's hard to deny that Duke was pretty aggressive trying to get to the rim, and because of that, they got rewarded. I mean, they they shot a lot of free throws, right? Their free throw rate was almost at 75%. So
I will add that part of that was MSU hacking in the final 3 minutes. But your point overall still stands, obviously.
right. I mean, even before then, they were shooting a lot of free throws. So yeah, I mean that's you sort of knew that was going to potentially be an issue going into the game. That MSU's ability to defend without fouling was going to be very important, and that sort of failed them in this one. And then a big part of that too, I think, is just the athletes that Duke had are significantly better than any of the individual athletes that MSU faced along the way. I mean, maybe Buddy Hield for Oklahoma, but other than that, and Montrezl Harrell for Louisville, but to have an entire team of guys with athletic ability like that was a little too much for sort of a team thing to overcome. So
and that's what's always been the problem for MSU when they go up against Duke and North Carolina, and they're just at a talent and an athletic deficiency. And I was at the game. And what stuck out to me was just MSU was just not able to do what it wanted, and a big reason for that was because right after the hot start, Duke really extended that defense out, and they would pressure the ball handler well outside the three-point line. They were not letting MSU set up any sort of sets, and once they did that, that was it, because this MSU hasn't been a team for a while, and not much under Izzo. They haven't been a slashing team. They haven't been a team that takes the ball, drives to the hoop, and whatnot. Trice had done it a bit more this year. Valentine infrequently, but MSU was just not able to set up many sets offensively. It led to the turnovers. It led to bad shots, sometimes good shots, but then if a guy drove and pulled up for an open three early in the shot clock, Izzo, would have pulled the guy. And it kind of comes back to something KJ had brought up earlier this week on Twitter that I had brought up during the game when I was there, is that when MSU is unable to run their sets, they don't have the athletes, they don't have the talent, they don't have the freedom from Izzo to freelance very well. And so that's just why against teams of the caliber of athlete like North Carolina and Duke, where they can extend that pressure and they can extend it effectively and they can extend it for long periods of time, MSU's offense really, really struggles to get much going. And I really got that sense because all watching, I was up second row from the top actually, but on the sideline, so I had a pretty good view. And they just refused to drive by the Duke pressure. They were looking for passes, they were looking for screens instead of just using your I don't know if they had a speed advantage or not, but driving to the hoop. And that's exactly what Duke did all game long on offense. They set screens and they drove and they got fouled, or they made some tough baskets, or they made some layups and dunks. And that's exactly how you want to play in this way basketball is being called now. And
yeah, I agree with that to some extent. I think that against Oklahoma specifically, this MSU team was able to freelance to some degree, especially, and really only between Trice and Valentine. But yeah, I mean, against Louisville, against Virginia, and against Georgia, I would agree. And for most of the year, I mean, that was the issue, was the inability of individuals to create for themselves. And you saw that. I mean, Bryn Forbes had a rough game, and so did Alvin Ellis. And when those guys aren't doing anything, I mean, neither of those guys hit a shot, and neither had an assist. So when those guys played a combined 30 minutes, you're going to have some trouble. And yeah, I thought there was a little too much Alvin Ellis for my liking, and there were some stretches, especially in the first half.
I was surprised there was a lot of Alvin Ellis.
And especially in the first half, there were times when Ellis and Clark were both on the floor. And as much as I love Marvin Clark, the two of them on the floor together in a national semifinal game is a little concerning, just because both are relatively inexperienced guys that can be suspect with the ball in their hands, right? Both have pretty high turnover rates and both make bad decisions at times. So that was concerning. And because of some foul trouble issues at certain points, there were some interesting lineups in there. I thought that Colby Wallenman actually played phenomenal defense against.
You know,
Okafor.
looking back, I think he did play better than I had thought at the time. You mentioned Ellis and Clark. They had 3 of MSU's 4 turnovers off the bench. Trice had 3, Valentine had 2, Dawson had 5. I believe 2 of those might have been offensive fouls, or at least one. I know at least one was, but he got it stripped pretty easily a couple times down low. Certainly not the way, I'm sure he wanted to go out. But yeah, there were some weird lineups in there. It was when you had Nairn in there, a guy who does have the speed to drive, but the inability to shoot, it kind of limits what you can do. Although, Nairn 0 for 3 shooting, but he did have 5 rebounds or 5 assists and no turnovers. So only 19 minutes though. It was a game where I don't think MSU could have afforded to, against that caliber of a team, and because Duke is kind of thin, they don't rotate as much. It didn't seem like a game where MSU would be able to play a lot of guys off the bench and get that much out of them against the talent they were going up at. Ellis had 11 minutes, Clark had 10 minutes, Costello had 15, but that was kind of weird. And then the foul trouble inside got them, as it has gotten them every single time. Wolman played pretty good defense on Okafor, and generally MSU played pretty good defense on Okafor. I know he went 7 for 11, 18 points, 6 rebounds, but a number of those were dunks. But it was they could get nothing scoring inside. Schilling didn't score. Costello had 6 points. Dawson really struggled to. He went 5 for 12. He struggled to score. Weird lineups. It was a game in which if Izzo had the depth maybe he has next year, or had in 09 or had in 05, things could have maybe turned out differently. But it was clear, Trice was struggling to hold on to the ball. Everybody was struggling to hold on to the ball. Trice went 6 for 13. Valentine actually went 7 for 11. His final numbers were actually better than I had thought live. 11 rebounds, 22 points. But MSU just really struggled to get everything going. And as we kind of get back to the fouls here, Duke drove, got fouled. It's something we've seen a lot of teams do to MSU this year and in recent years, and MSU just straight up not able or willing to do it back. And I think part of that comes to Izzo's regimented sets. Few coaches run better, better and more sets than Izzo does. But when those sets get taken away, they didn't have the athleticism or wherewithal to kind of play that type of game or just drive to the hoop.
I'll say too. I mean, the guy who can do that to some degree is Trice, but he's not a guy who will go to the rim and get fouled. He's a guy that's going to pull up and take a deep three.
Right, and he's also a pretty little guy. And Nairn is a little guy too.
Right, but when he's a little bit off from 3, when he's 2 for 7 from 3, that really hurts. Mm-hmm. And so there was some of that. I think too that MSU was pretty bad in transition. There was a particular stretch in the first half where the game was close, and there were 3 straight transition opportunities that came up empty. One was a sort of poorly attempted alley-oop to Clark, I believe.
Right.
There was another one where Trice looked like he had a clear path to the basket, ended up pulling the ball out and taking a 3 and missing that 3. And then also there was the Tum missed layup.
And that was the one. That was the one I thought was basically not ended the game, but after that it was done. I think they were down 7. Nairn got the steal, went in for a layup to cut it to 5, missed, and then boom. I don't remember exactly what happened, but boom, they were they were from being down 5, from about to be down 5 to instead being down 11, and MSU never got much closer than that the rest of the game.
Yeah, I thought, those three in succession really hurt for a lot of reasons. Partially because those turnovers or missed shots ended up allowing for Duke to sort of get back into a set quickly, which turned out typically well for them. But these things kind of snowball. If you don't end up getting the basket, then it's easier for your opponent to get into transition, and then it's easier for them to get a basket, and then it's harder for you to set up your offense. So, those things kind of snowballed during the middle to late portion of the first half, and because of that, that lead kind of got out of hand. And then from there, it was just very difficult because MSU was sort of in trouble. They got outshot from the free throw line again as well. I mean, not only was Duke taking a lot of free throws, they hit 73% of them. So that's another thing where, had MSU been a little better and Duke a little worse at the free throw line, maybe that's a single-digit game at the under 8 timeout or something like that.
And
a bunch of little things.
And it didn't help that after the hot start for the rest of the first half, MSU missed what seemed like every 4-footer, any 4-footer or shot that was not a layup but right near the basket. They didn't get any of those, which is something they've struggled with at times. And when they laid duds, that was one of the reasons they missed shots around the basket, and I thought they did early in that one. And the free throws. I don't know what. Actually, let me pull it up. Winslow went 9 for 11 on the game. He was on the year he finished at a 64% free throw shooter. Like you said, if a couple things went differently, maybe they're in that game at the under 8 timeout.
Well, another thing that happened there in the first half that I thought was a really bad sign was when Okafor came out of the game for a stretch in the first half, and they put in Plumlee, and Duke went on a run. I thought that was a bad sign because when Okafor's out of the game, that's a time when MSU needs to be, if not keeping even, at least making a run themselves. And when we weren't able to do that, that was a really bad sign, I thought. And I forget exactly what the time frame for that was in the first half, but it certainly occurred, and I remember thinking, like, oh, this is bad news. And there were some other weird stat lines, right? Like, looking at this now, I don't remember Denzel Valentine getting 11 boards. That's impressive, although no assists. And then Tum Tum having 5 assists and no turnovers. I wouldn't have expected that either. Dawson.
Even when I look at Duke, Tyus Jones went 3 for 8. Quinn Cook went 6 for 12. And that was, it felt like every basket they either hit was either a big one, a difficult one in a good spot, or a dunk or something like that. Like I said it before, it just felt like every single time MSU put 6 points together, and you're like, oh, this might be a run to get it back in it. Duke just responded emphatically, and they were helped at times by the whistle, but they were MSU hits a bucket, Duke drives, hits 2 free throws, and it just felt like that deficit in the second half. You just kept looking at it, and it was just never getting down to like a reasonable spot. I remember. My father-in-law was like, if they get within 10 at the 10-minute mark, they're in this. And that was about at like the 13-minute mark or something like that. And then I think right around then was when Dawson got the 2 fouls, and then all of a sudden they were down like 17 or something like that. And it was like, yep, it wasn't coming. And that was a big one, the one where Dawson got called for the trip when the Duke guy just kind of stumbled over his own feet. And that was a spot where MSU was down 13. You get the ball back, maybe cut that to 10-11, and you maybe can string something together. But nope, and it ended in a I don't even remember what it ended in. But Duke pushed the lead up after that. It might have been a 3. I know there was one stretch where Duke, I think, got 2 offensive rebounds on a possession and resulted in a 3 or something like that. It's just Duke just made every play at every important time, and that seems to always be the case with Duke, and especially against MSU, where they're now 9-1 against Izzo.
Yeah, and one other thing that I thought was interesting, at least, was MSU was not dominant on the boards in this game. They were better than Duke on the boards in this game, but it seemed like that it came at sort of a cost, because there were a number of occasions where there was a ball tipped back out towards midcourt, and there'd be 2 Duke guys there that would end up with an easy basket, and
Right,
MSU guys
remember
were
those.
trying to crash the glass on 2 or 3 occasions, and I thought that those were important, because essentially what that meant was MSU was trying to crash the glass with a number of offensive players, and weren't able to come up with offensive rebounds. And because of the emphasis on rebounding, Duke was able to get some runouts in transition easily, and that's a bad sign. I mean, it makes sense that there's always a sort of gamble there, right? A gamble between how many dudes you send to the offensive glass versus how many guys you send back to stop transition opportunities. And it seemed like Izzo made the gamble that he was going to send lots of guys to the offensive glass, and that makes sense to me, just given the game. You know, you kind of have to. It's high risk, high reward, right? If you end up extending possessions and don't end up giving up those transition opportunities, it's a major advantage. But it sort of worked against us here, and those 2 or 3 opportunities that turned into 6 points for Duke, had those been 4 or 6 points for MSU, it's a completely different game, right? So sometimes
right, and that just never. Right, it never happened. They never got that stretch of a couple lucky breaks, a couple threes to spark something. They never got it. Every time they thought it was getting there, it didn't happen. And it was one of those games where you wonder, you look at the roster, what if MSU had got Tyus Jones, or what if MSU had got Tyler Ulis, or what if MSU had got Jahlil Okafor or Cliff Alexander or Devin Booker, and just so many guys that Izzo, struck out and missed on it. And that's why he went so hard for so many of those guys, because that's the kind of talent you need to win it all. They got every ounce of juice out of this team and somehow took it to a Final Four, but there was a clear step up in talent against a team like Duke, and I'm sure losing to Duke was especially painful to Izzo, because him getting his 2nd national championship, the 3rd for the school, is what's driving him more than anything. Because when you win that when your school wins that 3rd title, the amount of schools that have won 2 compared to the amount of won 3, there's a big drop off there, and he wants to get to that next step. And to lose it to Duke, which has always dominated him, and for Duke to go on to win another national championship, you had to wonder what maybe Caleb Swanigan was thinking if he was watching that, and it brought back a lot of the recruiting misses that Izzo's had.
Yeah, don't ask Josh about that. I'm sure Josh would be concerned as well. Although it does appear that Swanigan probably had his mind made up already, since he announced that he was going to make his decision this week.
Right.
Something tells me. I mean, he didn't have to decide that he was going to make his decision this week for any external reason.
But by
so my guess is that
right. But by most accounts, it doesn't appear to be MSU. In which case, it may have backed up his decision or potential decision or whatever. But Izzo has swung and struck out on a lot of these guys, and if he had gotten a couple of them, who knows how things, not that they'd be in this exact position, but who knows how things play out. And you can see that's why they meant so much to Izzo, because Duke plays 8 players, and 4 of them are freshmen, and they just won the national championship. And this isn't even a Kentucky thing where you have 8 McDonald's All-Americans or whatever it is. It's you got some of them, and when they had to kick off Suleiman, the freshman became even more important. But he got a good number of them, and he won. And Krzyzewski won a national championship on on the backs of them. And Duke didn't always go for those types of players. They were kind of late, kind of getting into that one and done, and it's something that Izzo has never quite been able to do, and not without trying. And he said, coaches don't want, if coaches say they don't want the one and done freshmen, they're either lying or they're stupid. And Izzo absolutely wanted them, and it's interesting, as we're recording this, I saw earlier today that Cliff Alexander announced he's going to the NBA, and he probably projects as a second-round pick, but he had all sorts of eligibility issues at Kansas, and I'm sure he's wondering if things should have played out differently. Not even that it would have been MSU, but just the way kind of things work now. And Krzyzewski has gotten a lot of good players out of Chicago, and that's where Izzo has not been successful for quite a while. And it's pretty close by, but.
So if we're gonna, if we're talking long view here, and I think it makes sense to do that at this point, right? I would say that it appears to me too that there was some validation both ways, right? I mean, the one and done thing.
I think there was a different. If you had gotten maybe Izzo's opinion, or if you had looked at things after the Louisville game, and if you had looked after the Duke game, they'd be different, because recruiting may be the right kinds of I don't even know if it's the right word, but character or the buy-in. This team got to the Final Four based on chemistry, not on talent. However, they didn't get to the national championship game. They didn't win the national championship. They were a clear step below everybody else who was there, who was loaded with NBA talent. I think that's the difference. Izzo will get you to Final Fours. He's gotten to 7 Final Fours on some teams that probably shouldn't have gotten to the Final Four. But to make that next step to win the national championship, you got to have another level of talent that MSU has only had a couple times since that 99, 2000, 2001 run.
Yeah, but I think Wisconsin was how many plays away from winning the national title?
But Wisconsin's got 3 NBA players.
Right, but I mean the recruiting level for them. I mean, it's not like
sure, but Decker was a 5-star recruit, a top 20 recruit. Koenig chose Wisconsin over Duke, and Kansas and others, and Nigel Hayes was like a top 150 player. And before Bo Ryan had 2-3 NBA quality players on his team, he'd only made 1 Elite Eight in his career until these last 2 years, or 2 Final Fours. It's that step up in talent that pushed them to the edge of winning a national championship, and that's something that MSU, they probably had it in 09, but they ran up against a tough team. They had it in 05. And then other than the 99, 2000, 2001 team. So it's not something that they've had very often. And we'll get into this in a little bit as we wrap up Duke. But maybe in a year, maybe next year, maybe the year after, they may have that quality of talent that they haven't had. And I'd argue maybe they had it in 2011, but things obviously didn't work out.
Right, or you could make the argument that the talent was there last year also.
Right. That's another one.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not it's no guarantee of talent's no guarantee.
But
either way.
Right. Last year's team was a team that was good enough to win the national championship. I don't think this year's team was a team that was good enough to win the national championship. And I think Izzo would probably say the same. It's kind of funny when you compare the teams, but it's kind of way UConn just. I don't know. I guess UConn may be the outlier, because UConn always seems to string together some improbable runs without the maybe the Duke or Kentucky level talent.
Well, so I think that there are 3 related but not identical concepts here, right? One is talent, one is recruiting, and then the third is performance. So, as we see with Wisconsin, is the best example that recruiting does not necessarily equal talent. On the court, right? I mean, being a top 150 guy like Nigel Hayes, top 150 guys go all over the place, not necessarily to even high level programs. So recruiting is correlated with talent, but isn't necessarily a total predictor.
Sure, but
And then,
I think it's much more predictor in basketball than football.
oh, I would agree. I would agree with that too. But I would also say that and individuals make such a difference in basketball, and they don't as much in football. But at the same token, I think that there have been MSU teams since 2000 that had enough talent on them to win the national title, and didn't for whatever reason. And then there have been teams, and that's sort of just the nature of the single elimination tournament, right? Just because you have an NBA talent, a team with a lot of NBA talent on it, doesn't necessarily mean that you advance in the tournament. I mean, Jabari Parker got eliminated in the first round last year, so it's one of those things where talent and performance are correlated also, but not necessarily. One isn't necessarily determined by the other, and so I would just say that the swings and misses in recruiting by Izzo hurt, but maybe not as much as we thought, because we just made a Final Four to some degree. And,
right.
And when you watch a team like Wisconsin do well without having one-and-dones on their roster, you think, okay, well, just because you're not getting the one-and-done guys doesn't necessarily mean you have no shot at a national title. It means that things have to congeal in such a way for a particular run.
Sure.
And then you have to hope that you don't get a whole bunch of injuries like we did last year. But yeah, I mean, it's all interesting. I just figured I'd
right. I mean, if you take out the 2 UConn titles, which Magic, it's just I don't know how they do it. But if you take out the 2 UConn titles, the champions in the past decade-ish are going backwards: Duke, Louisville, Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Florida, which had those 2 loaded teams. North Carolina back to 2005, and then another UConn. Izzo's had a couple teams since his start that have had the talent, I think, to win it all. I think 2005 had the talent. They ran into a really, really good North Carolina team. 2009 had the talent. They ran into a really, really good North Carolina team. 2011 maybe didn't have it, depending on how you look at things. Looking back, it's maybe more obvious than it was at the time. And then I think last year had the talent, and they just ran into a UConn team that was doing one of its magical runs. And this year's team didn't. And I guess we're kind of wrapping this part up. But moving forward, if Izzo's gotten to plenty of Final Fours, and he'll love every Final Four, and this one maybe meant the most out of all of them. But it is interesting because I think it might have been after Louisville or Oklahoma when he said, this run kind of cemented his beliefs in what he's been doing and the kinds of players that he has been able to bring in, that you can win that way. And I think he can get to the Final Four that way. He's proven you can get to the Final Four that way. But I think to win it all, unless you're UConn, to win it all, you got to have, I think, a lot of NBA caliber talent, and Izzo hasn't had that a ton since then. And if they're going to get to that point, it's going to have to be one of those teams. I don't think this team was going to win the national championship. Now, maybe I guess if they had faced Wisconsin, but Duke was very much head and shoulders above this MSU team and played like it. Now, did you just watch the game at home?
Yeah, I did. It was.
Yeah, I had. I don't know if I had said I was up in the air about going. I ended up going. My wife's grandparents live there, so we've always got a place to stay, which is nice because that place was packed. Ended up getting tickets for. I'll just say more than $350 to sit in the second to last row at the very top. It was below the press box, actually. There was a little bit of an overhang, so you could see the court and everything and all the lower bowl, but you couldn't see the upper bowl on the other side. They actually had TVs set up, which was actually good because some of the people we were with couldn't see all the way down to the court, or at least see very well. I could see. Had a great time. That Indianapolis remains the perfect big event city. Everything's within walking distance there. Had a lot of fun throughout the day, just interacting with people. A lot of Wisconsin fans are pulling for MSU and MSU vice versa. A lot of I saw some Wisconsin. I don't know what fans they were, but they had MSU shirts on and Wisconsin hats on. Every MSU Wisconsin fan that walked by each other high five, and so I guess that real rivalry and border battle was temporarily suspended for.
And in Indianapolis, of all places, to me, Indianapolis is like ground zero
Right,
of the entire real rivalry.
Right. And MSU and Wisconsin fans have both been to that city a whole hell of a lot of times in the past 5, 6, 7 years. But fan turnout I thought was maybe 40, 30, 25, 5. I think that adds up in terms of Kentucky, MSU, Wisconsin, Duke. Not as much Kentucky, honestly, as I expected, but I think MSU and Wisconsin both travel well, and it was nearby, so it did make sense. Atmosphere was tremendous for both games. I stayed for the Kentucky-Wisconsin game, and that was just such a good game. And it's interesting, watching live, I didn't catch things that I would have caught on TV, such as the Harrisons just winding the shot clock all the way down and shooting multiple times late in the second half. I didn't catch that live because it just felt like it was so, adrenaline was just kind of pumping. It was such big moments that I didn't even when you're there, you didn't really think about it. It's kind of a different dynamic when you're kind of out of the vacuum, so to speak. And Wisconsin MSU fans, I think a lot of MSU fans that stayed, I think left a lot happier with Wisconsin winning than if they had left after MSU losing. There were a lot of MSU fans celebrating with the Wisconsin fans, so the MSU fans that stayed did get something worth cheering for. I thought that was kind of funny. I've never seen so many shocked or crying fans leaving a stadium as I did with Kentucky, because, they hadn't lost a game. Like, you didn't lose a game all year, and you lost that, and you don't even get to play for the national championship was pretty shocking, and it was just interesting to see all the fans. So I had a good time. It's expensive. Thankfully, my wife's parents actually opted to pay for her tickets. Some of them came with, I think, a group of 4 of us went, and so thank you for that. And had a really good time, really good city. What do you say?
It sounds like you got the hookup pretty well. I think if I would have had a place to stay, it would have been
exactly
a little
that
bit different.
right. It had been booked. Right, the city had been booked up for weeks. I was only able to go because her grandparents lived there, so I'm always thankful for that. I when I would cover Big Ten tournaments or whatnot, or go to the football game, the Big Ten football game, I always stay there. So it's a pretty thankful for that setup, and I'm hoping that one day that WrestleMania will be there, because I will definitely go to that. I kept thinking that when I was looking at the expansive football stadium again. It was kind of funny. I tweeted it. The last time I had been at the Final Four was 2010 in Indy, and I sat courtside right behind the MSU bench for covering for the State News. And now 5 years later, I'm up this very second row from the very top, and it was just kind of a funny dynamic. But it's a different experience whether you're close or whether you're up high. And just overall, had a really good time. Indy is a great place for that. They come back to Indy a lot, obviously, and it's for good reason. I know Greg Doyle from the Indy Star wrote that it should be in Indy every year. I don't think that. I think it's good to move it around, but I think coming back to Indy as much as possible is good, and I believe they plan to keep doing that. But as we transition here to next season, Spartans, they lose Travis Trice and Brandon Dawson and Keenan Wetzel, but they gain a whole heck of a lot. Eron Harris, I believe that's how you say it, transfer from West Virginia.
Is it? I think it's just Aaron. I think it's Aaron.
Aaron. I'd always say it's probably Aaron. That would make more sense. Harris, transfer from West Virginia, is eligible to play. Javon Bess, who basically missed most of the year, will be eligible to play and was very promising in the little time that they did see him. They had Deontay Davis, the McDonald's All-American from Muskegon, and they had Matthew McQuaid and Kyle Ahrens, some shooters, as true freshmen. So it's a team that's going to be real deep. And you'll have you'll have a lot of guys who are in their second year in the program and could theoretically make that type of sophomore type jump, whether it's Nairn and Clark, who both showed a lot of promise as freshmen. They'll be sophomores, but also Forbes and Javon Best too. And Forbes and Harris will also be in their second years in the program. So they have the potential to make some big jumps too. Joe, when you kind of look at the your initial thoughts when you look at the roster for next year and what MSU can do.
Well, I think a lot depends on the decision of Caleb Swanigan this coming week, which will be interesting. He's supposed to make his decision, I believe, on the 11th. Is that correct? The Nike Hoops Summit. I'm not sure exactly when that is, but he'll be making his decision shortly, and I think that's going to be a big part of it. I watched that McDonald's All-American game last week.
I know you did. You didn't seem to. Seem to enjoy it.
Well, the thing is that it's an all-star game, right? So, like, nobody's playing hard. Deonta Davis was one of the guys who actually appeared to be making an attempt to box anybody out, which was kind of amazing. And then the problem, too, in a game like that for Swanigan is that there's not a whole lot of attempt to get a guy post touches just because it's guys trying to show off and just have ISO plays against other McDonald's All-Americans. So, what was interesting is I hadn't ever seen those guys play before. I'm not as tuned into the recruiting scene as some of our other writers, but yeah, Davis. I liked how confident both of the guys were to take jumpers. That'll be an interesting dynamic. Just because
that's an interesting thing. Well, sorry, finish your thought.
No, you're fine. And then the Swanigan is an interesting prospect because he's not real tall. So my best comparison in terms of the 5 minutes of him I saw was in his worst case scenario seems to be Derek Nix as a junior and senior, and his best case scenario seems to be like Jared Sullinger. That's a relatively wide range, although Nix was always a good college player and especially useful. But he's got a really unique skill set in that he does have pretty soft touch around the rim and has some post moves. So Swanigan's might have the ability to bring in something really valuable to this team if he commits, and I think that he changes sort of the ceiling and answers some questions about post scoring that exist as it is. So yeah. But anyways,
I'm kind of operating on the idea that he's not picking MSU just based on what I've seen. I know the crystal ball I think still might have MSU, but a lot of those are based on picks from a while back. I also just read a writer who believes it's down to Cal and Purdue. So we'll see what happens, but it seems unlikely. But you mentioned Davis and his ability to take a jumper, and I was actually talking to somebody about this today. My dad, actually. Big men who can take jumpers generally don't get to under Izzo for quite a while. Because I thought this when I was thinking Matt Costello, and he had been my pick to be kind of the breakout player this year because it was kind of versatility. He didn't for various reasons, but he has the ability to hit an outside shot, and he took a few of them this year. I don't even know if he made any of them, but he has that ability, and he doesn't take them because part of that comes back to these regimented sets that MSU runs, and they generally don't result in the big guy taking a jump shot because the big guy's got to be down there rebounding. And Adrian Payne came to MSU with the ability to shoot three-pointers, and he made them in practice all the time. But Izzo didn't want him shooting the ball, and if he shot the ball, he was getting pulled. And it wasn't until late in Payne's junior year when he started hitting enough of those deep shots that Izzo had to leave him in there. And then as a senior, he was basically a three-point dynamo, and it was a big part of him, his draft stock. Now with Davis, I don't see a position he's going to be in where Izzo's going to want him to be taking jump shots, and it was kind of a thing people said about Izzo for a long time that he couldn't develop big men, and you point to guys like Paul Davis. Marquise Gray, and stuff like that. And Suton was a guy who, at the end of his career, was able to take and make outside shots. Draymond Green, similarly. So I've always thought that kind of hurt MSU in recruiting big men. Not that they don't develop big men, but just Izzo's system, it takes a lot of time for the big men to adjust, I think, more than it does for guards, because his offense has always been kind of more guard-friendly, guard-oriented, and it's always been some interesting spots with big men. And you've got Draymond Green now, who might get an NBA max deal, who kind of buffs that idea. But when you look at...
Well, Draymond didn't take threes as a freshman either.
No.
I mean, he was a jump shooter to some degree. I mean, I remember in the Final Four game against UConn,
right,
he was shooting jumpers pretty effectively. But, yeah, I mean, Marvin Clark, although he's not exactly a big man, did a pretty good job shooting, although it did appear that Tom Izzo had a love-hate relationship.
Right, there was that spot in the middle of the year he kind of was in the doghouse, and part of that, he wasn't making shots, first of all. That was part of it. But he very clearly was in favor of Izzo's favor by the end of the year.
Right, and to me that seemed more of a defensive effort and
but he's 6'6". He's kind of a 3-4 guy. I'm thinking the guys who come in as the pure power forwards or centers, right, who have the ability to shoot the ball in. They have, and it kind of went back to my point earlier on the podcast about freelancing and how they've never been a team that freelances very much. That's one thing with Wisconsin. They run regimented sets, but they've got generally 5 guys out there who can hit three-pointers. You can move guys around. You can be versatile with their lineups. Izzo is more guard-oriented and isn't able to. And so that's why, like Matt Costello is going to be a senior next year. Like, that seems crazy to me. And Gavin Schilling is going to be a junior. Like, you feel like through 2 years that these guys have done not much of anything, and a lot of that is on them. I'm sure Izzo wishes he could have been able to redshirt Gavin Schilling last year, but Costello is going to be a guy who is going to be very much called upon next year to lead the charge inside with Dawson gone, and they haven't had a post up. Payne was able to post up well, and he did pretty well, but when they had Derek Nix as a senior, that was it was almost just like really fun to watch when they just dump it into Nix, and you just knew he's either going to make a move or he's going to pass, and it started from the inside out, which the offense hasn't done for quite a while. I don't know if Costello will be able to do that. He has, at least high school had the ability to make moves, to hit shots, but he just hasn't been able to for whatever reason. And to get back to your original point, when you brought the point about Davis being able to hit a jump shot, it's something that's valuable, but something I don't know if will be used very much, at least early in his career.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah, the three of Costello, Schilling, and Davis together it'll be interesting to see how they sort of rotate through, because I could definitely see situations where Costello and Schilling are on the floor at the same time, with Costello playing the 4. I think it sort of depends on matchups. And also I thought it was interesting. I thought Izzo kind of went heavy into post-up sets after the Texas Southern loss early in the Big Ten season, and MSU, offensive efficiency went south for a little while, right, and then that sort of drifted back to the perimeter over the course of the Big Ten season, and then into the tournament, which was the more efficient way to go. But yeah, I mean, that Davis's ability to shoot a jumper, sort of aside, he's going to play significant minutes one way or another. And what'll be really interesting to me about that team next year is who is going to be handling sort of secondary point guard duties after Tum Tum, because I think that there are a bunch of guys who have the ability to do it. I think Aaron Harris has that ability, and it's been talked about that he's been doing that in practice. Valentine obviously has the ability to distribute himself. But it'll be interesting to see, are you going to play Denzel Valentine at point guard for stretches? I mean, it wouldn't be that surprising, but it would
that's
be
what
a
I was
big
wondering.
lineup.
Because you've got a lot of wing players and a lot of shooters. You got Forbes, you got McQuaid and Aarons. I don't know if any of those guys will redshirt. Um, Valentine can play the 3. He can play the 2. He can play the 1. Javon Best is probably a 3-4 type of player. A lot of wing guys, and I'm curious how much more of a slashing team this will be next year. Especially, I think he kind of said out of frustration, but Izzo said after the Duke game that he needs to recruit guys who just drive to the rim and get fouled. Now, I don't think they're actually going to do that, but he has players next year who kind of, I think, will have that ability to do that. And and with Tum Tum, you can't play him 40 minutes providing, zero offensive threat. Now, presumably he will improve on that over the summer, but I'm going to guess you're going to see Valentine as the backup point guard. I know Eron Harris has been brought up, but maybe Valentine runs it with Harris a little bit, and Valentine can be off the ball. Forbes was playing. Forbes was the number 2 ball handler a few times in this tournament. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but it's clear Izzo at least believes he can handle it somewhat. He'll also be in the second year of the program, so you've got a knowledge that I think will be increasing with these guys. But the point, they've got a lot of wings, they got a lot of depth, they got a lot of talent, but what exactly they can do to score inside with the big men, and then the point guard situation is a little iffy. So as you kind of look at this team, big picture, preseason rankings wise, I think this team has the potential to be really, really good. I've seen some top 10 preseason rankings. I've seen one in the 20s. What do you, without, not relative to other teams, but at least when you look at the team for next year, where do you think they're going to be better? What do you think is going to be kind of the strengths of that team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the defense will improve next year just because guys will be competing hard to get playing time, and I think that defensive intensity is a pretty good proxy for playing time with Izzo. So I think that's going to be interesting. I would say, coming into this year, MSU was number 18 in the country, and I think that seemed a little generous actually at the beginning of the year. But I think it's probably going to be somewhere in that range. I mean, I would expect them to be top 20, maybe top 15. The long shot of Swanigan could put them in the top 10. I kind of doubt it, but just like you do. But yeah, I mean, I would guess this is a team that should be a Big Ten contender. I don't necessarily think they'll be a Big Ten favorite, but certainly a Big Ten contender, and then top 15, top 20 type team. Not a team that I think will be favored to get to a Final Four next year, but certainly should be sort of positioned well to make a run at that point, provided that Valentine stays healthy, more or less, because he and maybe Aaron Harris are going to be the 2 most important players, and so long as those guys stay healthy, I think that they'll be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, if Sam Decker leaves, which I think I don't know, I think he should. I wouldn't be surprised if he does. And if Karis LeVert stays, I think you're looking at a top 3 in the Big Ten of Maryland, MSU, and Michigan, kind of in no order there. I think those 3 might stand out. With Wisconsin, you'd have Nigel Hayes and Bronson Koenig, but not a whole lot left in the rotation from this year. Iowa loses a number of seniors. Ohio State's kind of loses Russell. They're kind of look at where they're at. So I think MSU would be in a good spot in the Big Ten. It's not going to be like last year where Wisconsin was clearly head and shoulders and everybody else was basically playing for second. But it's a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Go ahead.
I think Jaylen Brown's decision is also pretty big. He's a top 5 recruit who's got Michigan on his list. I think that he's a probable Kentucky commit based on what I've seen, and then also the KenPom. KenPom has a recruiting projection system that is interesting. I'm not sure. It tends to be pretty accurate actually, but isn't based on sort of the insider knowledge that a lot of other projections are based on. So it's sort of an interesting metric, and it hasn't really gained a whole lot of traction, which is surprising to me, just because it's got sort of the Ken Pom seal of approval on it. But yeah, Jaylen Brown's decision, if he ends up at Michigan, I think becomes the favorite, probably just because he's he's a one and done guy immediately, and especially if LeVert stays. Although I'm not sure how many scholarships they've got to pass around at that point.
Yeah, I know. The big guy, I forgot what his name was. I know he, I think, is in a situation.
Bielfeldt?
Yeah, I think he's in a situation where he might or might not stay, but we'll see. My computer's going to die soon, so as we wrap up here, give me your short little rant on Duke after what happened today.
Okay, so very quickly, basically, Duke Basketball Report, who's their sister site, published a couple different articles, and one, just as an aside really quick about Duke Basketball Report, they're basically like a front end for a Red Cedar message board type forum that I didn't realize. So they publish a whole bunch of articles all the time, but they have very few comments on them because everyone goes through to their forum. So it's just weird. It's like a ghost town compared to like TOC, which has comments all over the place. TOC's community is fantastic.
You guys are awesome.
They really are, and frequently the comments are significantly better than the articles I post. But regardless of that, so they like, we did a Q&A, we passed questions and answers back and forth, and they gave me like two sentence responses to every question that I asked. And so, readers were commenting on the Q&A saying like, oh, these guys couldn't even give you the time of day, basically, which I thought was interesting.
Sometimes that happens with people. Every once in a while, whenever I was running, I don't look into that very much.
Right, that's fair. But in any case, they ran a piece about Bo Ryan being a sore loser because he made those comments about the rent-a-player thing. So there's an entire piece which wasn't real long, but it was basically just saying like wow, Bo Ryan is being such a sore loser because he's he's sore about these one-and-done players, even though Bo Ryan was referencing graduate transfers and the fact that he's going to miss his seniors because they've been there for
I'll
4 years.
talk after if I got time on my computer, I'll bring this back up with you, but about the grad transfer issue and what he said. But that wasn't the key thing, but keep going.
Right, and then the last thing was Duke Basketball Report sort of talking about how Grayson Allen was hated only because he's a white player, and that couldn't be further from the truth for any number of reasons. Mostly because Grayson Allen, when he made that dunk against MSU and then got in Travis Trice's face for absolutely no reason.
See, I didn't see that. I saw you mention that. You said he got in Travis Trice's face and yelled something. From where I was standing, I didn't see it. So that caught my attention when you're talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and watch that game, I forget exactly where that play occurred, but it was totally unnecessary, and at the time I felt like he should have gotten teched up, and I think a lot of people on Twitter did also. So there was that, and then also Michael Weinreb, who's a great college football writer, big fan of his, had this article in Rolling Stone where he's basically talking about how he hates Grayson Allen because Grayson Allen is sort of the embodiment of privilege, right? Duke, has this air of privilege, and Duke, in life, guys like Grayson Allen always win. And so they in their article, in the Duke Basketball Report article, they were saying, wow, I can't believe that Michael Weinreb is hating on Grayson Allen because he's white and a Christian, and which is totally taking it out of context in the first place. And then they also made some comments about how how is it any different to be ripping on a guy because he's white than if he was a minority, even though that is also a completely different thing. So I was just really unhappy with sort of the way that they were sort of not just letting those things go. Like, people are going to hate Grayson Allen because he plays for Duke, not because he's white.
Finish.
Sorry. And so, why not just take your trophy and go home? Like, why are you concerned about these rhetorical things that are happening outside of you anyways. But that was sort of my very quick and dirty take on all of it.
I will say, yeah, being upset about that after winning the championship seems kind of pointless. But, this is the internet, and people get upset about stuff like that. I will say, I don't think it's that he's white. I do think the fact that he's a white player who plays for Duke, who appears to have a bit of an edge, kind of is what gets under people. Like, people didn't hate John Shire, and I was thinking about it today. I was thinking, comparing the reaction, the initial reaction to Grayson Allen compared to like Spike Albrecht at Michigan. When it was Spike, it was like this little underdog, just guy who was just going nuts. With Grayson, I think he was McDonald's All-American. You could tell he had that confidence and that edge that maybe you didn't see from Spike. So, and I think when you're a white player that play for Duke, it's instantly like a thing, like because of Leitner, because of Reddick, because of Paulus. It's just like a thing. It's not necessarily always true, but it's like a thing that people mention. Oh, there's the Duke white guy. All the good white players go to Duke. It's something that people have believed for a long time. Not always the case, but it's just a thing that's there. Whether it's true or not, it's a thing. And I think a lot of people instantly did not like Allen because he was the new Duke white guy without knowing anything about him. And then when you saw, he kind of has this edge and this confidence about him, it just kind of adds into that. But overall, the Christian thing, I don't even know where the hell that came from. But
yeah, I mean, it was part of the Rolling Stone piece, was just like, mentioning that Grayson Allen had gone to like a Christian academy for high school.
Okay, I got you.
But it was just a mention. It wasn't like oh, this guy is a terrible person because he's Christian.
And now the other thing, the Bo Ryan deal. So John Solomon from CBS tweeted last night. Bo Ryan had said he doesn't do rent a player. Now my initial thought, a lot of people's initial thought was, well, he's talking about freshmen because Duke had freshmen, one and done freshmen. Kentucky had one and done freshmen. Wisconsin doesn't have one and done freshmen, and people reacted. So I did. Wisconsin went after Diamond Stone and they didn't get him. It seemed kind of hypocritical for him to say that. At the same time, you see later when the full comments came out that he immediately afterwards said, fifth-year guys. And you obviously, I think we're on different sides here, but I didn't understand why. I haven't. It's something that even reading and hearing what he said, I feel like it still needs to be asked to Bo Ryan, what exactly did you mean? Because even though he said fifth-year grad transfers, I almost got the sense he was just like, he meant rent a player as one and done, and then he also said fifth-year transfers like they were two separate things. Because like fifth-year transfers is not like a big thing in college basketball. It had nothing to do with Wisconsin. It had nothing to do with Duke. It had nothing to do with Kentucky. It's not like an issue in college basketball very much. Like it even is with football in that Wisconsin program with Russell Wilson and Vernon Adams and stuff like that. So I'm still under the impression he was talking about freshmen, but I can't say that. I can't say it for sure. I wish I could ask Bo Ryan what exactly he was talking about.
Well, the question itself was like, is it going to be hard, something along the lines of, is it going to be hard to let your seniors go, after this run? And then he was saying, like, yeah, these guys have been here for 4 years. We don't do this rent-a-player thing. I mean, that's what the full answer was. So, I mean, to me, it sounded like...
No, go ahead.
So, like, he's just talking about seniors specifically. So, rent-a-player seniors are different than 4-year seniors.
Right.
But I think that's what he's saying.
Right, but it just seemed out of place because it wasn't like, I know he was talking about his seniors, but I heard it and was under the impression saying, we have our guys for 4 years, 4-year seniors, we don't do rent-a-players, meaning we don't do guys that are here 1 year, which... I don't know. I can't say for sure. Honestly, last night I thought he was talking about freshmen. I still kind of think he is, but I can't say it either way. At the same time, I know he said fifth-year grade transfers, but I just didn't get the sense that's what he was he was talking about the whole idea in general of players being there for 1 year, whether they're freshmen or seniors. But and I thought it was a little bit hypocritical because Wisconsin has gone after the freshmen and didn't land them. And I had some Wisconsin fans saying, we don't need one and dones. When I pointed out the point, well, you got here on Player of the Year and 2 5-star players. They're obviously very important. And it was just kind of the idea that I've heard some MSU fans, even with football, like, oh, we don't need the 5 stars. We'll have 3 stars and beat you. It's like, no, you need. Well, so I think that was a whole thing today. And Bo Ryan complaining about the officiating, I thought was again a bad look coming off a loss like that. Wisconsin was only called for 2 fouls in the first half. Officiating was bad, but to act like it cost either team the game or gave the game to anybody, I don't think will look good. So you got quick comment. My computer's about to die.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming with all of those things. It just I don't there were some insinuations by the Duke blog that got me, and especially because they've made no comments about stuff that's happening on their own campus, right? Like some student at Duke hung a noose on campus, right? Like let's talk, if we're going to talk about race and Duke. Something tells me that Grayson Allen is not the object that we should be talking about, but that's all I got there.
So, okay, that'll wrap things up for this week's podcast. Next week, moving forward, we'll probably talk a little bit more football. We may just kind of talk off-topic stuff, just kind of whatever was going on. We'll see. So make sure you subscribe on iTunes or the RSS. Make sure you check out theonlycolors.com for a bunch of great stuff still as we kind of shift into the off season. And for Joe Tui, I am Chris Vernini, and thanks for listening, guys. See you.